Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to this month's webinar, The Future of Transportation, and I'm delighted to have on the program Dan Sturges. Dan is a guy I've known for just a couple of months now, but he's consistently impressed me with his vision and his background, his kind of many multivariate background in transportation design. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about this. As I mentioned a couple of seconds ago when we were waiting to get started, I think my first aha moment on this whole thing of understanding where we're going, where we need to go, and where we actually are headed in terms of transportation occurred in maybe our first conversation where I said, well, here's a guy who represents this concept, SwiftTram. So anybody who's listening to this can go to SwiftTram, just the combination of those two words, .com, and see an example of what we're talking about there. And I go, well, this is unbelievable. In other words, if we can take a progressive city, so Dan's in Boulder, I live near Santa Barbara, take either of those cities and put in SwiftTram. And I go, this is unbelievable. I mean, that would get the job done. And Dan goes, really? You think you're in Santa Monica and you think you're going to get out of your car, you're going to give up your car because you can move around Santa Monica in one of these things? What about the rest of Southern California? What if you want to go someplace else? And I go, oh, I guess it's not that easy, is it? And Dan goes, no, it's not that easy. So, Dan, welcome to the show, and let's get some conversation happening on this. As I like to say, if you're interested in writing in questions for Dan, please do so in the sidebar on the left. And why don't we just get into this thing? So, as I say, in preface, we all want simple solutions to this. We know we need to overhaul the way we move ourselves around the planet, and we want simple solutions, but I guess the bottom line is none exist. Would you agree with that, Dan?
I guess I agree. I mean, I sometimes laugh I look at diagrams of the internal combustion engine, and you see these, all these parts, these 600 moving parts, and I don't think that was a simple solution. But I think, so we're looking at, how to move in a more multimodal, intermodal type of a way, more of a right sizing using information communication technology, the ICT revolution, which allows us to really create new transportation models now. And so that's not simple, but nor was the internal combustion engine. It wasn't simple either. I don't know if that's a worthy comparison, but
right. Well, this gets at to our current transportation model, which is all of these things. I think we can agree. But do you want to comment further on that?
Yeah, I mean, what we do in most of the United States, if anyone's read my documents, when we talk about new solutions, I find it helpful to look at the issues of land density and urban density. So in downtown New York City, Manhattan, if any of the listeners have been there, that's what I call fixed city. It has these very tall buildings. It's very dense. And then out in most of the United States, we have what I would call thin cities, lower density. So from Phoenix to Atlanta to Denver to lots of California, it's lower density. And so the people who've been to New York City, they know what it's like you don't really want to own a car in Manhattan. You walk down the street, you catch a cab, you might take the subway. You're almost traveling like Tarzan is, multimodally, swinging from vine to vine. But out in Phoenix, you can't really walk to transit and get to the other side of Phoenix very easily. And that's where, owning a car is, such a part of our the way we get around. So when we start to think about how things change, I think that's important to think about those differences of the different types of communities. But more or less, you see the people that are doing car sharing like Zipcar and others talking about the fact that 90% of the time our car is not used. It's sitting there as it's something we pay for, but it sits outside not being used, outside of our home or outside of our office. And we also then, are dealing with all the emissions issues, but our cars are, every car that I'm looking at here in Colorado right now could be started and driven 2,000 miles. It could be driven to Florida, but most of our trips are less than 5 miles. And so we're not really thinking that much about how we could start right-sizing our personal transportation or right-sizing our transportation or how to how we could actually make it easier to use transit. So, I mean, in our area, there's these initiatives, multi-billion-dollar initiatives to bring light rail and other types of express transit throughout the region. But if I can't get off that train and get to my final destination 2 miles from that train station very conveniently, then it just doesn't make sense for me. And so how do we start coupling this idea of car sharing, bike sharing, maybe even small vehicles like I have a background in being available at the station for low prices to go that last mile? And then how do we start to create a system where people don't have to own cars as much? So to me, it's really about creating the freedom in our country, both in the thick city and the thin city, that we don't have to own cars. That's the vision that I'm a real advocate for.
Okay, and that must be, as you mentioned, that must be a completely different enterprise in a thick city versus a thin city. Do me a favor and let me just go back. Every time I do this, there are people who can't hear for whatever reason, and I should announce. Let me just go back. First thing, and I'm going to just circle for those who are, for whatever reason, having trouble hearing this. You can do it via the. So I urge you not to do both. In other words, you don't want it coming through your computer speakers and through the phone. But if you're having trouble hearing this thing, all right, back to live action here. So maybe we could take a few examples of how we can examine electric transportation. Where are we going? So take it from there, please.
Well, because we're all of us in the United States, we have the ubiquity of our road system that we have, and we have more or less a monoculture. We have this idea that one car needs to suit all of our needs and do everything that we're going to do. And we start to have this beginning of car sharing and better transit systems, but these are still being introduced in a relatively piecemeal manner. And so when we watch new vehicles, like you've pulled up on a screen, a very small vehicle, it makes me think about the last new type of vehicle introduced in this country was actually the Segway transporter, and didn't get the kind of success that it wanted in terms of being a revolutionary vehicle. But when you think about it, that vehicle was being introduced, and since it couldn't do all of the jobs that somebody needed for their transportation, it became a vehicle that a consumer would have to actually buy and actually make their transportation fleet more expensive. So if transportation has become very, very expensive, and as I've said, I mean, the average American says AAA is paying close to $8,000 a year for a car. So for 2 cars, a family, a household is paying, about $40 every day. So if you could imagine, every night after dinner, the car man, let's say, came and asked you to pay for your transportation each night. Knock, knock, knock. It's $40. Tuesday night, $40. Even over the weekend when you're watching Netflix and having popcorn, knock, 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 for another $40. It's very expensive, and we're in this revolution of information communication technology, and we have this great revolution, but we're still, most of us, paying that $40 on top of the other cost to bring in Comcast and other broadband into our homes, to pay more money to Jeff Bezos to bring us products. And in a sense, we have a lot of redundancy on how we access the world, redundancy of access technology. So I guess the vision that I have is that we start to integrate all of these options together better. They're almost like stepping stones to go across a river, where the conventional car is a big, heavy bridge, and that gets you across the river. But here is telecommuting. That's a stepping stone, but that alone may not be enough to eliminate the need to purchase a car. But maybe a good bus rapid transit system in your system is something, but maybe you can't get to that very easily or get to from it very easily. So how do you start to align these stepping stones in a way that makes it more meaningful for the consumer to maybe not have to own as many cars in that household? And that starts to reduce those expenditures, but it also has many benefits for the city. And so let's be honest with ourselves. We're not just consumers, we're also citizens, and we have to pay as citizens for our transportation as well in terms of streets. Oh, I have some feedback issues here. So, so what I'm trying to say by that is the consumer and the citizen, I call an odd name, the consumazen, the consumer then pays for transportation, both as consumer and citizen. And what I'm trying to talk about here is if we can help our citizens and our consumers not own as many cars, we can have a much more cost-effective transportation system. And by not being so car dependent, we can use cars on demand. We can rent the right vehicle for the trip. We can have better transit systems. We can walk more, become healthy. The obesity issues in our country are very severe. And so there's a real opportunity to really change things up. But it comes from fostering and creating a better new system.
Okay, very good. Well, let's get into this a little bit. First, let's just talk a little bit about electric transportation generally. I know what you're talking about is kind of multimodal, and I think that's your basic point. But I think what I wanted to do with this particular slide is just say, look, the people who are building, the Nissan Leaf and so forth and so on are essentially trying to accomplish a straightforward replacement of internal combustion engines with electric vehicles. And that is the paradigm. We're used to owning a car, and we're saying, okay, well, I'm going to swap out that thing with a gas tank for one that doesn't have a gas tank. But that needn't be the case. In other words, this multimodal type of a thing gets at some of the other paradigms, the other ways of thinking about transportation. But as long as we're on electric vehicles per se, you've probably studied this far more than I have. What is the people, for instance, at Plug-in America have an extremely comprehensive well-to-wheels comparison talking about, okay, even if you're burning coal, which accounts for 49% of our electricity in the United States, even with the current grid mix, electric vehicles are a good deal in terms of environmentalism. Is that true? Some people dispute these well-to-wheels analyses and point to other things like, lithium carbonate shortages or what have you. What is your take on just straightforward electric transportation?
Well, I think we're moving into electric transportation in terms of electric drive systems, regardless. Whether it's a battery electric vehicle, whether it's a plug-in hybrid, or whether it's a fuel cell vehicle, we're going into electric drive, regardless of the energy source. But in terms of the electric vehicle from the pure energy source, I'm sort of not that guy. I have studied this and I've looked around, and to me it makes a lot of sense to sell electric vehicles like the Leaf. Now, to me it makes sense to sell the Leaf as a battery bank system for your city to enable your city to be powered by renewable energy sources. And oh, by the way, it's transportation too. but nobody's doing that. And but I think there's a lot of value for the Nissan Leaf. But the Leaf has a challenging thing, which is it's trying to compete with this car that sits outside that I can drive across the continent, not my city, the continent. That's this idea of freedom that we all love so much.
Right.
So it's hard, I think, when you're trying to replace that, with this limited range vehicle. Now, the vehicle that you still have on screen, if I'm on the same page as you, is a very small, local use type of a vehicle idea, and people don't have those kinds of vehicles in their lives, so they don't have to compare it to anything really. So I think that the electric vehicle, 5-10 years from now, we will see electric vehicles, pure electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, more likely an application of local use transportation, local use personal transportation.
I see. Well, yeah, let's get through. Unfortunately, instead of choosing a Leaf, I chose this little 80-pound M-cycle, and it's a good example, obviously, of this kind of multi-modality that you're talking about. But I think we have some others coming up here.
Well, let's go back to that. Let me just kind of fill in some blanks on that thing. If you can go back to that. So So the thing is the situation here is, so if I'm in Santa Monica, California, and I was going to use a little vehicle like that, there's two kind of very key things that are holding me back from that. One of those things, so there's three. The thing has to be commercially available and has to be produced in quantities that lower the price point to where you'd want it to be. That, to me, looks like a $5,000 vehicle. That's, I'd like to pay, if I'm going to buy that in Santa Monica, I'd like to pay $3,000. If they can make a Tata Nano in India for $2,500 that has 4 doors and an engine and drive you around, then why can't that be a $3,000 vehicle for Santa Monica? Now, that being said, I don't want to buy that on top of owning cars. So what I would like is to be able to drive that around Santa Monica. Maybe I go a mile to my office or 2 miles. I'd like to be able to rent cars by the hour through Zipcar or other car share services when I need the, quote, far car. So that then starts to becoming more convenient for me, that I have this little vehicle, but when I need to go far, I can rent that vehicle. Now, if I have a lot of meetings out of Santa Monica, then that's not practical to rent those cars, because that'll cost me a lot of money to rent cars for all those trips. So what I want then is a better network across the region where I can get on a bus or a train or a subway or whatever and go to Pasadena. And when I get to Pasadena, if my meeting's at Caltech and that's 2 miles away and I don't have time to walk on that nice day, I need some transportation from that station to Caltech, whether that's a shuttle, a low-cost taxi, or one of these vehicles that I can rent. And so what I need is a network. I need a network. And this is not a digital network. It's a physical network. It's like creating the first fax machines. How did fax machines get started in this country? Well, no one sold one fax machine. They sold two. It was probably from some CEO of a company to their lawyer. And how do you build out fax machines? Probably by starting – how do you build out the networks that I'm talking about? You can't do all of LA, so maybe the way to start is focus on corridors where there's a lot of movement and build a meaningful corridor so people can start having this network of transportation available to them so they don't have to own as much. Okay, last point, safety. We have tons of SUVs. No one talks about where these SUVs came from, but in my observations, they came from just-in-time inventory back in the late 70s when all of our factories started moving their steel orders, from once a month to a dynamic order, which brought all kinds of new tractor-trailer trucks to our freeway system. And so as we got more and more big vehicles out there, how do these little vehicles deal with that? Now, I'm a part of starting this first neighborhood electric vehicle company, and we don't have airbags in it. It goes slow, and the safety record of these vehicles is impeccable. And these things are, legal on these things. And we had to design vehicles that were very small, but were taller than Chrysler minivans, easy to be seen. But I don't have time, I'm sure, today to talk about all of the issues around safety or how we deal with it. I mean, if I was God, I would just put a GPS chip in every SUV, and I said, if you're going to drive a vehicle of this kind of mass and you don't have a specific need, you're not a plumber or someone using construction equipment, and this is how you want to get around, you, my friend, need to drive 40% slower than everyone else, and that's just the rule that I'm going to make. And then all of a sudden, these big SUVs moving slow are going to allow these little vehicles to move a little faster and not worry about these big vehicles, and it'll make the small vehicles more enticing to people who want to get somewhere quicker.
It's a brilliant idea. And speaking of that, Richard Marks, who's the founder and CEO of a company called EcoV Electric, it's an NEV company, writes in, EVs or alt energy need to be demand-based, not supply-based. To create demand, the price of energy needs to increase, probably through taxes. Government subsidy does not change demand. What do you think? Dan, you want to speak to that?
Say it one more time, like as if I'm a seventh grader. I missed some of that.
So, in essence, the demand has to increase, and that's going to happen not through government subsidy, but through a kind of level playing field, kind of what you're talking about. In other words, if you could put a chip, the reason I bring this up now is that it's particularly germane to
Well, you're getting into my theories on how we change the world and how we change behavior. So I have something I'd rather draw, but I can't really draw it. So let's just see if you all have the imagination to stick with me on this thing. So let's say we're looking down on a big rectangle and a giant rectangle. Let's just imagine that all of a city, or maybe all of the country, we're all in one giant ballroom, and we're looking down on that rectangle, and everyone's in that room. And that's how we do transportation. That's how we get around every day. We all live in that room. And then innovators like, I actually know Richard Marks from years ago when I visited his neighborhood electric vehicle, but so innovators who have new ideas in vehicles, new ideas in car sharing, new ideas in how we do things. Let's just say if you build a room next to that rectangle, the next room over, the next ballroom that gets built, has all these new future solutions, and I call that the pink room. And you open these doors between the current ballroom to the new ballroom. You say, come on, everyone, let's go in the new ballroom. And guess what? Very few people go into the new ballroom. Very few people go into the pink room. And then what you need, I think, is another box on the other side, which I call the stink room. And you open up the doors from the stink room into the main ballroom, and you start having pricing go up, price of gas go up, people burning SUVs, making social statements, and all of a sudden it starts getting uncomfortable in the main room. And all of a sudden, Mr. and Mrs. start saying, maybe we should start thinking about going into the pink room. Yes. So what I'm basically talking about is kind of a carrots and whips kind of a strategy. I don't think our elected leaders and our lawmakers and people can really bring a lot of stink into the room if the public doesn't want to go into the pink room. The pink room has to have some very enticing new ways of living, new models of living, new solutions that people want or are interested in, that pique their interest, and have to be priced right. So there has to be a place to go for people before you can really start, dialing it up and raising gas taxes and all. I don't think those two rooms, two of those three rooms don't live. You can't have the pink room without the stink. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I get it exactly. It's brilliant. Good stuff. Well, let's go through a couple more of these. These slides get back into the subject of the variety of transportation modes and how they may come together to create the pink room.
So mass transit. So what we have in this country is we've had obviously a lot of talk about high-speed rail. And we have, and I've seen, basically, I think there's a lot of people who want more mass transit. And I think when I see these initiatives to raise the money, I think it's unfortunate that the vision of how these more enhanced solutions, this idea that there could be these really great park and ride centers, or you could have the little vehicles like we just saw to get inexpensively down to the station, and you could rent them, or you had a flurry of options of transit or local jitneys or taxis that will take you from any station. I mean, if every station along LA's light rail system was like an airport where you had shuttles and taxis and little vehicles to get you from that station to your final destination, I think the investments for these types of mass transit systems, the trunk lines is what they're called, there would be a much greater interest from the public to fund that when they saw the promise that they might not need to own as many cars and pay less for their transportation, and also as a taxpayer pay less, for new roads, and also to see the benefits in terms of the flow of traffic, to see that for very few dollars we could actually get our freeways moving faster, our businesses could do better. We wouldn't just have people sitting there in gridlock with their cars 75% empty.
Exactly right.
Oh, car sharing. So I didn't talk about car sharing. Go back. So first of all, I don't really like the term car sharing. I mean, how many Americans have shared anything from a company? Millions of us rent them. So I prefer micro rental or rental. But, if you're going to use car sharing, use car sharing. But we have less than 0.5% of the public after 10 years doing shared cars in this country. So the idea of renting, though, I love it. I mean, I love the idea that if you can build the network that I'm talking about, that when you want a truck, you get a truck. When you want a little sports car for a beautiful day, you have a sports car. You don't have to buy one vehicle and tie yourself to it for 3 years. The beauty of this, what I'm talking about, is that people are actually getting more cars. They're getting many more cars. They're getting into networks of thousands of cars. So it's this great thing about how you can reduce your transportation expenditures by 50% and how you can actually get more cars. And so what I'm really talking about, all of this stuff, is how the American public is going to get much more value to their transportation dollar.
Yes, that's a good point. Somebody writes in, says that mass transit is undignified. Look what's happening to airline travel. That's an excellent point. And it strikes me that even before we started to rethink, or at least some of us started to rethink transportation generally, there are these great difference in ethos. For instance, you can have a $300,000 a year exec who commutes into Manhattan from Greenwich, Connecticut on a train. He's perfectly happy to do that. You take the same really well-paid executive in Hollywood, he'd no more get on a train than he'd jump off a bridge. So
right.
we have different ways of approaching this thing from a kind of
yeah, and so we have to change a culture. I mean, we have the cultural inertia in our country is about vehicle ownership, and right now it looks cool to own a car, and China wants to emulate that. But as we start to see these new opportunities for the consumer and how to leverage ICT, all of a sudden I think people are going to look a lot smarter, buying transportation through a transportation plan that gives them all these different things, and that makes them smarter, and they're using their money better. I mean, they're using their extra money for their kids to have some extra education. They're just getting more out of their dollar. But we have to change the culture. So we have to have sort of a laboratory, a trans lab type of mentality of how do we do these things. So I've heard people talking about wanting transit cars where they could take their dogs on. I've heard the ideas of having transit cars where only women can go into certain transit cars for safety reasons. And maybe there's, first class. But right now, when you take that $8,000 per consumer in our country spending on their cars, you have something like $1.8 trillion every year going to the revenue stream of the automobile. And that's not a revenue stream. That's a river bigger than you can imagine. And right now, the money going into these kinds of alternatives are trickles. I mean, they're not even creeks yet. I mean, they're just little amounts of money. So the more we start to steer the money towards multimodal transportation, intelligent types of it that I'm talking about, something far more than just a bicycle and a bus ride, but all the vehicle sharing and all the vehicles that you want and all these other types of amenities that come with it, we're going to see, I think, our transit systems become really beautiful. And we're going to be able to get far more out of our dollar in terms of building wonderful cities by not being stuck to this idea of one car for every trip, everywhere we go, not owning a car, not tying ourselves to a car. Cars are amazing. Car ownership is an idea from a past century.
That's brilliant, great dichotomy. Cars are brilliant. Car ownership is outmoded.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So here we go, a couple more.
Ride sharing is really interesting, and when you watch what's happening in our country where we're actually cutting transit services, I mean, when you think with the concerns about climate change and all that's going on in the world, we're running out of fuels, we're running out of land. Transit is an elegant answer, but we're cutting service. To think that you can actually open up your iPhone, turn on your Facebook account, and see friends or friends of friends coming down the street and getting rides. And all of a sudden, as gas prices go up, the person who's burdened with the cost of operating that car has this ability to actually sell their seat and make some revenue for that ride. At the same time, the person who wants to ride transit has so many more seats available to them to catch in this urban area. So ride sharing is a huge part of our future, I believe. But it's got a same sort of cultural barriers on how we share our cars. I mean, we share elevators; those are elevator cars. But we are in a mindset of how we deal with our cars right now. We don't have cities yet offering better parking spaces for those who dynamically share a seat in their car to come in. We don't have those kinds of incentives yet. And learning how to use the system is very, very tricky. It's got a big chicken and egg problem. It's like if I went into a hotel and they told me, hey, look at that elevator over there. There's only going to be an elevator car once every 3 days. Well, you wouldn't stay there and wait for it, right? Would you? So you've got to get the supply of elevator cars coming before people are actually going to go out and look for a ride in one. So how do we get this started? It's like dropping a bike from the sky into a place that's never ridden a bike, and it's like people are looking at it and they don't even know how to ride it yet. We have to figure out as a society how to use ride sharing. But it's definitely a part of our future. It's very exciting, very elegant, very, very important, but very challenging to get started.
Yes. I would imagine, when I was a kid, I hitchhiked all over the place. And obviously, I picked up hitchhikers religiously. And obviously that's gone the way of so many things over the last few decades, never to return, I presume.
We're still, a lot of us are in this mindset of this is the new Ford Taurus and it's this aerodynamic car and it's the car for everywhere. So, in multimodal transportation, the future that we're talking about, multimobility, is that you want many, many layers. You just want saturation of options. You want to walk out your door and have 5 different ways that you could go somewhere. It's not about one. It's not about one, ride sharing is going to do it for us. No, it's about all these layers. And so if you start doing what I talk about, which is you have good ways to get down to transit, you can go across region, you have a nice last mile solution, you have the ability to own a neighborhood vehicle, you can get to car sharing. The more you start this off, the more ride sharing becomes even a nicer new complement, another tier of how you could do things that might be cheaper than actually doing the car sharing for that trip. And the part that's cool is you could see yourself, 5-10 years from now saying, I'm going to ride share out to this town. I would like to ride with an anthropologist or talk to somebody in business. So you actually start pairing yourself with people that have, conversational content along that ride as well.
Well, that's a brilliant idea. I'll tell you the reason I bring up hitchhiking, and you actually remind me of another one, and that is when you hitchhiked back in the old days, I'm talking about the early 70s, you were almost always picked up by an interesting, cool person. You almost always had a wonderful conversation with somebody. But
Yeah.
that's neither here nor
Yeah,
there.
well, that's the part that we're all, a lot of people are like, oh, the future's so scary to me. I can't own this giant house. Here goes my car. I can't afford to get my car. No, absolutely. I mean, there's so much about what we're talking about to be, if you're in a smaller vehicle, let's say, just driving around your community. When we started our neighborhood vehicle work, we went down to Arizona to Sun City. And we found people driving golf carts, and we said, "Well, why are you driving them? Is it because you save all this money, or is your air conditioner not started on your Oldsmobile when you get to Safeway?" And they're like, "No. We found most people like the fact that these things were open and they could just talk to their neighbors. It was conviviality."
Oh, that's
And
really...
and so all of a sudden, and then if you don't own these, if you walk out of your house and you're like, maybe I'm going to rent that bike and take it over to the train station. Maybe I'm going to rent that car at the end of the street. Today I might just walk. You're going to find a lot of people walking and meeting people and talking to people. I've had business opportunities come up here in Boulder because I'm walking, where I run into people on the street and I talk to them. And if I was in a car, never would have happened. So there's a huge social piece to this.
Yes, I can see that. Well, actually, the reason I brought up hitchhiking is because back in the day, Norway encouraged this. The whole country had a system where every citizen was given coupons, and every time somebody picked you up hitchhiking, you gave them a coupon, and you could trade them in for toasters or whatever. So, in other words, there was at the level of the federal government, there was encouragement to do stuff like this. So, which gets back to
yeah, absolutely. It's just I don't know what to say. It's just that it's very exciting to think that we can still. I mean, in the future, I'm describing, you're more likely to drive a Lamborghini. It's just a different future. It's just this idea that ownership and all the cost goes associated with that, being stuck with this one mode. It just works against everything. It works against your pocketbook. It works against your health. It works against your city's design and the cost of operating a good city. It's just this ownership thing of being stuck with one thing for all things. Is just unfortunate, very unfortunate now.
Here you go. This gets more into what you were talking about before. In other words, when you really think about this, it kind of rethinking the way we live, the way we get along with one another, where we live, etc. So, can you speak to this, please?
Well, if you've dealt with neighborhood electric vehicles, the one I designed and started the company of is now gemcar.com. It's now owned by Polaris. But if you spend, I've been in literally thousands of conversations and meetings, over 2 decades about these types of vehicles. And being a designer and being someone interested in these opportunities, I mean, there's a number of things that kind of come to you. So, I mean, first off, we started our NEV company, and the amount of money we needed to actually tool it up and put it in production was less than $1 million, $900,000. And I have a friend who works at Nike and does a lot of shoe design and stuff. And he said, "What? You did this for less than $1 million to tool up a vehicle, 600 parts and sub-assemblies?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's less money than it takes to make a ski boot." And so what you have then is this ability of this kind of do-it-yourself culture, the maker faire, this idea that the local car, the neighborhood car could be, maybe I get off the train someday and somebody's daughter designed the vehicle that's waiting for them. I mean, it's the fact that essentially these vehicles could be created more customized to the region. So in Minneapolis, something deals with weather and cold weather in a way that a vehicle in Florida never has to deal with. Florida has to be able to deal with the afternoon showers, and Southern California has a different form factor to the actual vehicle. So there's a lot of opportunities there on the customization. But there's this other interesting side, which is these are electric vehicles. They're very small. And so, you see people living in all new ways today. We go to coffee shops with our laptops. And so I can imagine these vehicles creating huddles. I can imagine these vehicles creating a circle and building a tent roof, and the vehicles hold the tent down. And it's, maybe it's the kids after school and their little, texting Facebook clubs start joining in parking lots and creating little campgrounds for themselves with these little vehicles, and they have these batteries that power up all the electronics and all their communication wares that they have. And these vehicles, could also, if you see what Toyota and Honda's done with their very teeny vehicles, these micro mobility vehicles, these vehicles can go inside of buildings. And so it changes, what's inside, outside. It changes the interface. It changes how we design our cities. And of course, we want to make a world where we're walking more and more active. And I think it's exciting to think that we could see less giant cars parked in our cities unused, and we could reclaim that space to be more active. But at the same time, people that have diminished mobility, walking abilities, can be more active and be part of their communities in new ways that are very exciting. So it's just an ability. It's like the elements to really redesign your city, and so it's very, very exciting from that standpoint. And then the other piece of it is the automation and the autonomous vehicles. And so I certainly see that I could be in a community 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and I could order a pizza at 3 in the morning, and a little robot vehicle would deliver me my pizza, and just stuff it into my house through a little robotic door. I see all that stuff coming as well.
That's really cool. Well, this next slide gets to what you were talking about there, and actually somebody wrote in and says this needs to be done in the context of where the environment, the transit comes in, mostly in cities. And this is, I think, Jim Miller wrote in a week ago and wanted me to make sure I asked you, is all this really necessary? All this transportation really necessary? In other words, instead of redesigning transportation, can't we redesign our cities and other kind of rethink where we're putting ourselves?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is all about access. And there's a gentleman, a researcher at University of Michigan, who did a nice little chart, which you could draw it. I can tell you how you draw it. You have on top is the word access, and then below it you have 3 words that are like the family tree. And the first word to your left is mobility. That's automobiles, trains, everything that we use to get around. Also could be called movement or transportation. Then you also have proximity. Where do you live? In proximity to something. That's a big component of how you access things. And then the third is connectivity, and that's revolutionary. We have millions of our little smartphones being made every day, and so we're going to a completely new world in terms of what the iPhone, the Android phone, the smartphone is able to do for us. So yes, I mean we've seen telecenters, we've seen companies exploring how people don't have to commute to work. There's just all kinds of experimentation and investigation that is possible now to rethink how we live and redesign how we live. But it's all about access, and we do have these, it's the connectivity tools really, which are the new story to this picture.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to just end with I don't want to blow smoke at you, but I'm extremely impressed with this, and I really want to play a part in getting your mind in front of the people who matter on this thing. I just wonder, and this is a kind of rhetorical question, what would be the result of my getting 2 Green Energies promoting you aggressively to the city managers and the transportation people, and getting you a consulting gig with as many of these people as possible? And the answer is we're about to find out because this 2 Green Energy thing really is growing in terms of size and the number of people, the type of people who connect. And I certainly want to put as many of them as possible in connection with you and just see what happens on this thing. I mean, I would presume that I would hope that you're available for some consulting gigs if I can get you people who raise their hand and say, I want to talk to this guy. I want this guy to come here and do a complete, a comprehensive analysis of what we're trying to get done here. Would you be willing to do that? Yeah,
absolutely. I'd be thrilled to have someone like you helping me in that regard. And, I think that these solutions need to be in context with a region. I mean, you can't go into Palo Alto, California, and really solve Palo Alto's problems without trying to get your arms around as much as possible with the larger Bay Area region, or as a way to get started, finding some meaningful corridors, as I said earlier, and really focusing on what could be done over the next 3 to 5 years, and really enriching those corridors with the right kinds of transportation services that we're talking about, getting embedded in the community to be able to really move the dial on this thing. But it's exciting.
Good stuff. Well, so tell me again that thing with access at the top and the 3 family members of the family tree. Where was that? That was really good.
Where was that?
Is it online someplace where people can
No, well, it's not. I mean, I don't know the gentleman's last name, Jonathan. So, I mean, a good group that does the same sort of thinking that I do in this area is Sue Zielinski's group at the University of Michigan, SMART. So if you go umsmart.org, umsmart- um, you will find an organization that is working very much about what they call new mobility. I think new mobility is a great term. I just think it's so general. It could be anything. I'm really talking more about smart multi-mobility or smart multimodal transportation.
Fantastic. And let me get your website then, just if.
Well, I'm doing a website that's more towards the young people and the public. I believe we ultimately need the decision makers out there to help us create and modify our infrastructure to make this happen. But how do you do that? You got to get the public seeing the possibilities and then starting to call their decision makers, their elected officials, to do something about it. So my more whimsical site is called wheelchange.us. So wheelchange.us.
W-H-E-W-E-L.
Yeah, it's not real change. It is trying to be real change, but it's wheel change. Kind of cute, kind of Elmer Fudd talking there. Wheel change.
That's good. Very good. Well, Dan, thanks. It's been terrific. Thanks so much for joining us, and I can't wait to see the results of what we can do together on this.
Well, I'm really excited. The time is now, and it's going to be a much better world. And the great thing about all this is it's an environmental story where economics are way on our side. One guy at General Motors once said, "I believe in economic gravity. The low-cost solution will win," and we have the low-cost solution here.
That's absolutely right, and it's a brilliant metaphor about the car guy coming to your door and wanting $40 every evening. That's a brilliant way of thinking.
Yeah.
All right, well, keep up the good work. Thanks, everybody, for joining us, and we'll, Dan, talk to you again soon.
Take care, Craig. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.